The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle, as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his red tunic for what would be the last time. He had served the royal family for 15 years, standing guard through countless ceremonies, state visits, and private moments. His record was spotless, his dedication unwavering, yet today everything would change because of one terrible mistake. It started 3 weeks earlier during a routine security briefing. Prince William had been discussing upcoming arrangements for a charity gala when Morrison received an urgent phone call. His daughter Emma had been rushed to the hospital after a serious car accident. The news hit him like a thunderbolt, and without thinking clearly, he stepped away from his post to take the call. What Morrison didn't realize was that he had left his communication device on the conference table, broadcasting his personal conversation to everyone in the room. The call revealed sensitive family information, including his financial struggles and his desperate need for extra money to pay for his daughter's medical treatment. Worse still, the conversation included details about his daughter's location and condition that could potentially be used by anyone with malicious intent. Prince William listened to the entire exchange, his face growing more serious with each passing moment. The other security personnel in the room exchanged worried glances, knowing that such a breach of protocol was unprecedented. Morrison had unknowingly violated several security procedures in those few minutes, putting not only his own family at risk but potentially compromising the safety protocols that protected the entire royal family. When Morrison returned to the room, he immediately realized what had happened. His face went pale as he saw the expressions of everyone present. Prince William's usually warm demeanor had turned cold and professional. The prince didn't say anything at that moment, but Morrison knew his career was hanging by a thread. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating. Security experts discovered that Morrison had been taking personal calls during duty hours for months, though none as serious as this incident. They also found that he had been sharing minor details about royal schedules with his wife, thinking it was harmless information. Each revelation made his situation worse. Morrison tried to explain his actions, emphasizing his daughter's critical condition and his panic as a father. He spoke about his 15 years of loyal service, the countless hours he had worked overtime without complaint, and his genuine love for the royal family. Several colleagues came forward to speak on his behalf, describing him as one of the most dedicated guards they had ever worked with. However, the security protocols were clear and non-negotiable. Personal emergencies, no matter how serious, could not excuse the breach of confidentiality and security procedures. The royal family's safety depended on every guard following the rules without exception. One weak link could potentially put everyone at risk. Prince William faced a difficult decision. He genuinely sympathized with Morrison's situation as a father, but his responsibilities as a future king meant he had to prioritize the safety and security of his family above personal feelings. The decision was not made lightly, and it weighed heavily on his conscience. The formal meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Morrison stood at attention in the same room where his career had begun to unravel weeks earlier. Prince William entered with a solemn expression, carrying the official documentation that would change Morrison's life forever. The prince's words were measured and respectful, acknowledging Morrison's years of service while explaining why his actions could not be overlooked. Morrison accepted the decision with dignity, though his heart was breaking. He understood the reasoning, even if it felt unfair given his years of dedication. As he handed over his badge and ceremonial sword, he wondered how he would tell his wife and daughter about losing the job that had defined his identity for so many years. News of Morrison's dismissal spread through the palace like wildfire. The other guards were shocked and deeply troubled by what had happened to their colleague. Many had worked alongside Morrison for years and considered him a mentor and friend. They knew about his daughter's accident and felt torn between understanding the prince's decision and feeling loyalty to their fellow guard. Captain Richards, Morrison's immediate supervisor, was particularly affected by the news. He had recommended Morrison for several promotions over the years and had always praised his dedication and reliability. The captain felt partially responsible for not noticing the signs of Morrison's personal stress earlier. He wondered if he could have done something to prevent the situation from escalating. The younger guards looked up to Morrison as an example of what a career in royal service could become. His dismissal sent shockwaves through their ranks, making them question their own job security and the unforgiving nature of palace protocols. Some began to worry about their own families and whether personal emergencies might similarly destroy their careers. Meanwhile, Morrison returned home to face his family with the devastating news. His wife Sarah had been expecting this outcome since the incident, but it still hit her like a physical blow. They had built their entire life around his steady income from the palace, and now they faced an uncertain future while dealing with their daughter's mounting medical bills. Emma, recovering in her hospital bed, noticed her father's changed demeanor immediately. When he finally told her what had happened, she was overwhelmed with guilt, believing that her accident had caused her father to lose his job. Morrison spent hours reassuring her that none of this was her fault, but the young woman couldn't shake the feeling that her family's problems stemmed from her reckless driving that night. The financial pressure became overwhelming almost immediately. Morrison's Royal Guard salary had been their primary source of income, and his pension wouldn't be enough to cover their basic expenses, let alone Emma's ongoing medical treatment. Sarah took on extra shifts at her part-time job, but it barely made a dent in their mounting debts. Word of Morrison's situation began to spread beyond the palace walls. A journalist who had been covering royal affairs for years heard about the dismissal and started investigating the story. He was particularly interested in the human angle of a dedicated servant losing his job during a family crisis. The journalist began reaching out to Morrison's neighbors and former colleagues for information. Back at the palace, Prince William was struggling with his own emotions about the decision. He had spent sleepless nights wondering if there had been another way to handle the situation. His wife Catherine noticed his distress and tried to comfort him, but William felt the weight of leadership bearing down on him. He knew he had made the right decision for security reasons, but it didn't make him feel any better about Morrison's family's suffering. The other members of the royal family had mixed reactions to the news. Some praised William for maintaining strict security standards, while others questioned whether compassion might have been more appropriate given Morrison's years of service and his daughter's condition. The divided opinions created tension within the family, with some members feeling that the monarchy was becoming too rigid and unforgiving. Security experts from outside the palace were consulted about the decision, and their opinions were similarly divided. Some argued that any breach of protocol, regardless of the circumstances, required immediate dismissal to maintain the integrity of the security system. Others suggested that Morrison's long service record and the extraordinary circumstances should have warranted a suspension or reassignment rather than termination. The palace staff, from housekeepers to senior advisors, watched the situation unfold with growing concern. Many had developed personal relationships with the guards over the years, and Morrison was well liked throughout the castle. His dismissal created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear among all employees, who began to worry about their own job security. As the weeks passed, Morrison's attempts to find new employment proved frustrating. His specialized skills as a royal guard didn't translate easily to other security positions, and potential employers were hesitant to hire someone who had been dismissed from such a prestigious position, regardless of the circumstances. The rejection letters piled up, and Morrison's confidence began to crumble. 3 months after Morrison's dismissal, an unexpected visitor arrived at his modest home in Surrey. Captain Richard stood on the doorstep out of uniform and looking uncomfortable. Morrison was surprised to see his former supervisor, especially since palace protocol typically discouraged contact between dismissed employees and current staff. Richards had come with disturbing news from inside the palace. Since Morrison's departure, security had become increasingly problematic. 2 new guards had been hired to replace him, but neither possessed his experience or dedication. One had already been caught sleeping during his shift, while the other had made several serious procedural errors that could have compromised royal safety. More troubling was the discovery that Morrison's replacement had been sharing information with unauthorized personnel. A routine security check had revealed that Guard Thompson had been texting details about royal movements to friends, treating the information as impressive gossip rather than classified intelligence. The breach was far more serious than anything Morrison had ever done, yet Thompson remained employed because his infractions hadn't been discovered during a crisis moment. Richards felt compelled to share this information with Morrison, not just out of friendship, but because he believed a grave injustice had been committed. He explained how the palace was struggling to maintain the same level of security that Morrison had provided effortlessly for 15 years. Several senior staff members had privately expressed regret about the dismissal, but no one was willing to challenge Prince William's decision publicly. The conversation revealed another shocking development. Princess Anne had apparently questioned the dismissal during a private family meeting, arguing that Morrison's loyalty and experience should have been valued more highly than a single mistake made during a family emergency. Her comments had created tension within the royal family, with some members supporting a more compassionate approach to employee relations. Morrison listened to this information with mixed emotions. Part of him felt vindicated to learn that his value was finally being recognized, but another part was angry that this realization had come too late to save his career. His family's financial situation had become desperate, with creditors calling daily and Emma's medical bills continuing to mount. The meeting with Richard sparked something in Morrison that had been dormant since his dismissal. He began to consider whether he should speak publicly about his experience, not out of revenge, but to highlight the human cost of inflexible institutional policies. Several friends had suggested he contact journalists, but Morrison had always been too loyal to the royal family to consider such action. Sarah noticed the change in her husband after Richard's visit. Morrison became more energetic and purposeful, spending hours researching employment law and workers' rights. He discovered that other royal employees had faced similar situations over the years, but their stories had been quietly buried under confidentiality, agreements, and institutional pressure to remain silent. The financial pressure reached a breaking point when the bank threatened foreclosure on their home. Morrison had exhausted his savings, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed money from every friend and family member willing to help. Emma's medical insurance covered only a portion of her ongoing treatment, leaving the family responsible for thousands of pounds in additional costs. During this crisis, an unexpected phone call changed everything. A legal aid society that specialized in employment discrimination had heard about Morrison's case through informal channels. The lawyer explained that Morrison might have grounds for wrongful dismissal, particularly if it could be proven that his long service record and the emergency circumstances of his breach had not been properly considered. Lawyer also revealed that recent changes in employment law provided stronger protections for workers facing family emergencies. Morrison's case could potentially set a precedent for how large institutions handle employee crises, particularly when personal emergencies conflict with professional obligations. The prospect of legal action was daunting, but it offered the first hope Morrison had felt in months. Meanwhile, at the palace, Prince William was dealing with increasing pressure from various quarters. The security problems that had emerged since Morrison's departure were becoming impossible to ignore. 2 separate incidents had occurred where protocol breaches by new guards had created genuine safety concerns, forcing expensive security reviews and procedure updates. The prince was also receiving subtle pressure from family members who believed the Morrison situation had been handled too harshly. These conversations were awkward and tense, as they implied criticism of his leadership decisions. William found himself defending his choice repeatedly, even to people whose opinions he valued and respected. Palace administrators were quietly documenting the problems caused by Morrison's absence, not necessarily to support his case, but to identify weaknesses in their hiring and training processes. The comparison between Morrison's 15-year unblemished record and the immediate problems with his replacements was stark and embarrassing for the institution. The legal case began to take shape as Morrison's lawyer gathered evidence and testimonies from former colleagues. What started as a simple wrongful dismissal claim began revealing deeper issues within the palace's employment practices. The lawyer discovered a pattern of harsh disciplinary actions that seemed disproportionate to the infractions committed, particularly affecting long-serving employees who had dedicated their careers to royal service. Several guards came forward privately to share their own experiences of fear and anxiety about job security. They described a work environment where personal emergencies were viewed as character flaws, rather than human realities. One guard revealed that he had missed his father's funeral because he was afraid to request emergency leave, while another had worked through his wife's cancer treatment without taking a single day off. The testimonies painted a picture of an institution that demanded absolute loyalty while offering little flexibility or understanding in return. Morrison's case was becoming a symbol of something much larger than one man's dismissal. It represented the struggle between institutional requirements and human compassion, between tradition and modern employment practices. News of the legal action eventually reached the palace through formal channels. Prince William was informed during his weekly briefing with senior staff, and the news clearly troubled him. The prospect of a public legal battle involving the royal family was always concerning, but this case carried additional emotional weight because of his personal involvement in the decision. The palace's legal team immediately began preparing their defense, focusing on the security implications of Morrison's actions and the absolute necessity of maintaining strict protocols. They argued that the royal family's safety could never be compromised, regardless of personal circumstances. The legal documents they prepared were thorough and professionally crafted, but they lacked any acknowledgement of Morrison's years of dedicated service. Public interest in the case began to grow when a sympathetic journalist wrote a detailed article about Morrison's situation. The story focused on his daughter's accident, his years of faithful service, and his family's current financial struggles. The article carefully avoided criticizing the royal family directly, but it painted a clear picture of institutional inflexibility in the face of human tragedy. The public response to the article was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive of Morrison. Letters and emails poured into the newspaper office, with many people sharing their own stories of workplace inflexibility during family crises. Several readers sent donations to help with Emma's medical expenses, and a small crowdfunding campaign was established to support the family during the legal proceedings. Inside the palace, staff members were reading the article and discussing it in hushed conversations. Many felt that Morrison was being portrayed unfairly as a victim, while others believed the article accurately reflected the harsh realities of royal employment. The divided opinions created tension among colleagues who had previously worked well together. Prince William requested a private meeting with his senior advisors to discuss the situation. The meeting was tense and difficult, with advisors presenting conflicting recommendations. Some urged the prince to stand firm on his decision, arguing that any sign of weakness would undermine future security protocols. Others suggested that a quiet settlement might be more appropriate than a public legal battle. The discussion revealed deep philosophical differences about leadership and compassion within the royal household. Some advisors believed that modern leadership required greater flexibility and understanding of human frailties. Others maintained that certain positions, particularly those involving royal security, demanded absolute adherence to protocol regardless of personal circumstances. During this period, Morrison was experiencing his own internal conflicts about the legal action. Part of him still felt loyalty to the royal family and was uncomfortable with the growing public attention his case was receiving. He had never wanted to become a symbol or to cause embarrassment to the institution he had served faithfully for so many years. His wife Sarah encouraged him to continue with the legal action, not just for their family's financial survival, but for other employees who might face similar situations in the future. She argued that Morrison's years of service had earned him the right to expect fair treatment, and that his dismissal had been both unjust and unnecessarily cruel given the circumstances. Emma's recovery was progressing slowly, but she was becoming increasingly aware of the financial and legal turmoil surrounding her accident. Despite her parents' attempts to shield her from the stress, she felt responsible for everything that had happened. The guilt was affecting her physical recovery and adding another layer of complexity to the family's already difficult situation. The legal proceedings were scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, giving both sides time to prepare their cases thoroughly. Morrison's lawyer was confident that they had a strong case, particularly given the public support and the testimony from former colleagues. However, he also warned Morrison that fighting the royal family in court would be an uphill battle, regardless of the merits of their case. 2 weeks before the scheduled court hearing, an extraordinary development occurred that no one had anticipated. Princess Catherine, Prince William's wife, requested a private meeting with her husband to discuss the Morrison case. She had been following the situation quietly and had conducted her own informal investigation by speaking with various palace staff members. Catherine revealed that she had discovered additional information about Morrison's character and service record that hadn't been considered during the original disciplinary process. Multiple staff members had shared stories of Morrison's kindness and professionalism, including incidents where he had gone far beyond his duties to help both royal family members and fellow employees during difficult times. One particularly compelling story involved Morrison staying late during a security scare 2 years earlier, working 18 hours straight to ensure the family's safety, while other guards went home to their families. Another incident described how Morrison had discreetly helped a young maid who was being harassed by a senior staff member, intervening in a way that protected her job while addressing the problem. Effectively, Catherine also learned that Morrison had been quietly contributing to a fund that helped palace employees facing financial difficulties. His own donations had been modest but consistent, and he had often organized collections for colleagues dealing with medical emergencies or family crises. The irony that Morrison was now facing exactly the kind of situation he had helped others navigate was not lost on anyone who heard this information. The princess presented this information to William along with her own perspective on leadership and justice. She argued that true leadership sometimes required acknowledging mistakes and demonstrating that institutions could learn and grow. Catherine suggested that the Morrison case presented an opportunity for the royal family to show compassion and humanity rather than rigid adherence to rules. William listened carefully to his wife's presentation, but he was clearly troubled by the implications of what she was suggesting. Reversing his decision or settling the case quietly would require him to admit that his original judgment had been flawed. For someone in his position, such an admission could have far-reaching consequences for his authority and credibility. The conversation between William and Catherine continued for several hours, covering not just the specifics of Morrison's case, but broader questions about the kind of leaders they wanted to be. Catherine emphasized that their future roles as king and queen would require them to balance tradition with compassion, and that their response to Morrison's situation would set important precedents for how they would handle similar challenges in the future. Meanwhile, Morrison was experiencing increasing anxiety as the court date approached. The media attention was intensifying, with photographers following his family and journalists requesting interviews. He had maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal, refusing to make inflammatory statements about the royal family, but the pressure was taking its toll on his mental health. The legal team representing the palace had prepared a formidable defense, focusing heavily on the security implications of Morrison's actions and the potential consequences of allowing personal emergencies to override professional obligations. Their arguments were legally sound and professionally presented, but they portrayed Morrison as a security risk, rather than a dedicated employee who had made a mistake during a family crisis. Public opinion was increasingly turning in Morrison's favor, with several prominent figures speaking out about the importance of workplace compassion and understanding. Trade unions were monitoring the case closely, recognizing its potential implications for workers' rights across various industries. The case was becoming a test of whether traditional institutions could adapt to modern expectations about employment. Fairness Emma's medical team reported that her stress about the family situation was actually hindering her physical recovery. The young woman was having difficulty sleeping and had lost weight due to anxiety about the upcoming court proceedings. Morrison was torn between pursuing justice for his family and protecting his daughter from further emotional trauma. Surprising development occurred when several current royal guards submitted a joint letter to Prince William, expressing their support for Morrison and their concerns about the precedent his dismissal had set. The letter was respectfully worded but clearly stated their belief that Morrison's punishment had been disproportionate to his actions. This unprecedented action by current employees demonstrated the depth of feeling within the palace about the case. The letter from the guards created additional pressure on Prince William, who now faced the prospect of potential morale problems among his security staff. The guards had taken a significant risk by speaking out, as they could face disciplinary action themselves for challenging their employer's decision. Their willingness to take this risk demonstrated their strong belief in Morrison's character and their concern about the fairness of his treatment. Senior palace administrators were becoming increasingly worried about the potential damage to the royal family's reputation regardless of the court outcome. If Morrison won his case, it would suggest that the palace had acted unjustly. If Morrison lost, the royal family might still appear unsympathetic and inflexible in the eyes of the public. The situation seemed to have no clear path to a positive resolution for anyone involved. The night before the court hearing, Prince William made a decision that would surprise everyone involved in the case. After days of deep reflection and consultation with Catherine, he decided to personally visit Morrison at his home. The prince arrived without fanfare, accompanied only by a single security officer catching Morrison completely off guard. The meeting was awkward and emotional for both men. William apologized for the way the situation had unfolded, acknowledging that while security protocols had to be maintained, the human cost of his decision had been greater than he had initially realized. Morrison was gracious in accepting the apology, but he made it clear that kind words alone could not undo the damage that had been done to his family. During their conversation, William learned more details about Emma's condition and the family's financial struggles than had been included in any official reports. Morrison spoke candidly about the shame he felt at being unable to provide for his family, and the guilt he carried about the impact his mistake had on everyone he loved. The prince was visibly moved by Morrison's dignity in the face of such hardship. Morrison also shared his perspective on what had happened that day in the briefing room. He explained how his panic about his daughter had completely overwhelmed his professional judgment, but he emphasized that his years of faithful service should have demonstrated his character and loyalty. He wasn't asking for his job back, but he wanted acknowledgement that he deserved better treatment than he had received. The conversation revealed to Prince William that Morrison harbored no anger or resentment toward the royal family, despite everything that had happened. This lack of bitterness actually made the prince feel worse about the situation, as it demonstrated the depth of Morrison's character and loyalty, even in the face of what many would consider unfair treatment. Before leaving, Prince William made an unexpected proposal. Rather than proceeding with the court case, he suggested a private settlement that would address Morrison's financial needs while establishing new protocols for handling employee emergencies in the future. The settlement would include compensation for Morrison's lost income and Emma's medical expenses, as well as a recommendation letter that would help him secure new employment. Morrison was skeptical about accepting any settlement that might appear to validate his dismissal, but William assured him that the terms would acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances of his case and his years of exemplary service. The prince also committed to implementing policy changes that would provide more support for employees facing family emergencies, ensuring that Morrison's experience would lead to positive changes for others. The proposed settlement included a provision that Morrison would serve as a consultant in developing these new policies, drawing on his experience both as a long-serving employee and as someone who had faced the harsh realities of the current system. This role would provide him with income while allowing him to contribute positively to preventing similar situations in the future. Morrison asked for time to discuss the proposal with his family and legal team. The offer was generous and would solve their immediate financial problems, but he was concerned about how accepting it might be perceived by the public and other employees who had supported his case. He didn't want people to think he had been bought off or that he was abandoning the principles that had driven his legal action. Sarah and Emma both encouraged Morrison to accept the settlement, arguing that continuing with the court case would only prolong their stress and uncertainty. Emma was particularly eager to put the situation behind them so she could focus on her recovery without the constant worry about her family's finances and her father's legal battle. The legal team was divided about the settlement offer. Morrison's lawyer believed they had a strong case and could win a larger award in court, but he also acknowledged that fighting the royal family was always risky, regardless of the merits of the case. A guaranteed settlement might be preferable to the uncertainty of a court verdict, especially given the family's immediate financial needs. News of Prince William's visit to Morrison's home leaked to the media within hours, creating intense speculation about what might have transpired during their private meeting. Some reporters interpreted the visit as a sign that the palace was preparing to settle the case, while others suggested it demonstrated the prince's personal concern about the situation. The public reaction to news of the visit was generally positive, with many people praising Prince William for taking personal responsibility and showing humility by visiting Morrison at home. The gesture was seen as a sign of mature leadership and genuine concern for an employee who had served his family faithfully for many years. Inside the palace, reactions were mixed. Some senior staff members were concerned that the prince's visit might be interpreted as weakness or an admission of wrongdoing. Others believed it demonstrated exactly the kind of compassionate leadership that would serve the royal family well in the future. The debate reflected broader tensions about how the monarchy should evolve to meet modern expectations, while maintaining its traditional authority and dignity. After careful consideration with his family, Morrison decided to accept Prince William's settlement offer. The agreement was finalized just hours before the scheduled court hearing. Surprising legal observers and media, representatives who had gathered to cover what they expected to be a landmark case about workers' rights and royal employment practices, the settlement terms were more generous than anyone had anticipated. Morrison received compensation equivalent to 3 years of his salary, full coverage of Emma's medical expenses, and a comprehensive recommendation letter that praised his 15 years of dedicated service. Additionally, he was offered a consulting position to help develop new employee support policies, providing him with both income and purpose during his transition to civilian life. Most significantly, the settlement included a public statement from Prince William acknowledging Morrison's exemplary service record and expressing regret that his dismissal had been handled without sufficient consideration of his personal circumstances. The statement stopped short of admitting wrongdoing, but clearly indicated that lessons had been learned from the situation. The new policies developed with Morrison's input revolutionized how the palace handled employee emergencies. A support system was established to provide immediate assistance to staff members facing family crises, including emergency leave provisions, counseling services, and financial assistance for medical emergencies. The changes ensured that no future employee would face the same impossible choice between family obligations and professional duties. Morrison's consulting work proved invaluable in identifying other areas where palace employment practices needed modernization. His insider's perspective, combined with his recent experience as a dismissed employee, gave him unique insights into the gaps between official policies and daily realities. The resulting reforms improved working conditions for hundreds of palace employees. Emma's recovery progressed remarkably once the financial stress was removed from the family. The young woman was able to focus entirely on her physical therapy and rehabilitation without worrying about the cost of her treatment. She eventually made a full recovery and later pursued a career in healthcare, inspired by the compassionate treatment she had received during her own medical crisis. The settlement and subsequent policy changes were widely praised by employment rights advocates and trade unions. Morrison's case became a model for how traditional institutions could acknowledge mistakes and implement meaningful reforms without losing face or authority. Several other major employers adopted similar emergency support systems for their own staff. Prince William's handling of the situation, particularly his personal visit to Morrison, and his willingness to implement reforms, enhanced his reputation as a leader who could balance institutional requirements with human compassion. The episode demonstrated his growth as a future monarch and his commitment to modernizing royal practices while maintaining their essential dignity and purpose. Morrison used his settlement money wisely, paying off all his family's debts and establishing a small business, providing security consulting services to private clients. His reputation for integrity and professionalism, enhanced rather than damaged by his experience with the royal family, attracted numerous clients who valued his expertise and character. The legal precedent set by the settlement influenced employment law discussions throughout the country. While the case never went to court, the public attention it received and the reforms it sparked contributed to broader conversations about workplace compassion and the balance between security requirements and human needs. 5 years later, Morrison was invited back to the palace for a ceremony honoring long-serving employees. Prince William personally thanked him for his contributions to improving palace employment practices and acknowledged that the reforms Morrison had helped develop were among the most important changes implemented during his tenure. The two men had developed a mutual respect that transcended their earlier conflict. Emma, now fully recovered and working as a nurse, accompanied her father to the ceremony. She met Prince William for the first time and thanked him for the compassion he had shown her family during their darkest period. The prince was moved to learn how well she had recovered and how her experience had inspired her choice of career. The ceremony included the announcement that the Employee Support Program Morrison had helped create would be expanded to include mental health resources and professional development opportunities. The program was being renamed in honor of another long-serving employee, but Morrison's foundational contributions were formally recognized in the official announcement. Morrison's former colleagues welcomed him warmly during his return visit to the palace. Many credited him with improvements in their working conditions and job security. The fearful atmosphere that had followed his dismissal had been replaced by a culture of support and understanding that benefited everyone who worked in royal service. The story of Morrison's dismissal and its aftermath became a case study in leadership schools and human resources programs. It demonstrated how initial mistakes in handling personnel issues could be transformed into opportunities for meaningful organizational improvement when leaders were willing to acknowledge errors and implement genuine reforms. Morrison never returned to royal service, but his impact on the institution extended far beyond his 15 years as a guard. His experience had humanized the palace's employment practices and created lasting changes that would protect and support future generations of royal employees. What began as a personal tragedy had ultimately contributed to creating a more compassionate and understanding workplace for everyone who served the royal family.